Ronke was in the busy bus when an old woman walked into the bus and sat in front of her. She looked so exhausted and fell into a very deep sleep. Ronke snuck her hand into the old woman's bag and grabbed her purse. She was so delighted and immediately yelled out to the driver to stop the bus as she could not reach the old woman, waking up to notice that her purse was gone. Immediately the bus stopped. Ronke jumped out of the bus and ran as fast as she could away from the people to avoid being caught with the old woman's purse. Ronke arrived home a few minutes later, excited to finally open the purse. She poured the contents on her bed and saw a few naira notes and a stylish looking sunglasses. Hmm, she exclaimed to herself as she wore the sunglasses, admiring herself through the mirror. Ronke, in that moment, saw a shadow move behind her, but was unsure of what she saw. Immediately, her sister Bulu walked into her room to invite her to church, but Ronke informed her sister that she was too tired to attend. She quickly disposed of the stolen purse, throwing it into a plastic bag and dumping it into the trash outside her house. Tired and exhausted, Ronke went to bed and woke up hours later to realize that it was already bright. She looked up at the time and it was 8 in the morning. Ronke immediately jumped up from bed, remembering that she was late for an important interview. She put on her clothes and rushed out of the house to quickly catch a taxi. 5 Boulevard Road, she said to the driver as they set out on their way. She put on the sunglasses, trying to hide all her worries when she saw a man standing in front of their taxi. Terrified that the driver might run him over, Ronke screamed out at the driver, commanding him to stop the car. "Do you want to kill that man? Why are you driving carelessly without looking at the road in front of you?" She yelled at the taxi driver, who asked her what she was talking about. "Are you blind? Can't you see that man standing right in front of your car?" she said to the driver as she pointed again towards the road in front of them, and the driver gave her a weird look, asking what she was talking about. "There is no one there, madam. Are you sure you are all right?" he asked Ronke, who gently removed the sunglasses and realized that no one was standing in front of their car. "Where did he go?" "He was just standing there," she said to the driver, who looked at her terrified as he wondered if she was sane. The driver, terrified at what he had just experienced, told Ronke that he was no longer interested in driving her to her destination.
Oga, but we have not arrived now,
She said to him as she threatened not to pay him for the distance that he had covered, but the driver did not mind as he told Ronke to come down from his taxi. Zooming off immediately, she shut the door. Ronke stood there stranded and alone. It was a lonely road and no one seemed to be in sight. She stood for some minutes, hoping to find another taxi willing to take her to her destination, but no taxi seemed to come her way. Her interview was in less than an hour, and Ronke began to panic at the thought of missing the interview. Her friend Tola secured the interview for her after years of being rejected by several companies, and Ronke was so delighted to land her first interview. "I can't miss this interview," she said to herself as she began to run quickly, hoping to arrive on time. The sun was in full blaze, and Ronke put on the sunglasses again to shield her eyes from the scorching sun. She walked briskly, hoping to meet up with time, when suddenly she saw strange-looking people walking behind her. Ronke wondered where the people had come from and did everything possible to mind her business, but the people seemed to be walking towards her at a ridiculously fast pace. She crossed the road to the other side and noticed that they also crossed the road as well, as though they were following her every step. Terrified at what was happening, Ronke began to run as fast as her legs could carry her. As predicted, the strange people too began to run after her, leading Ronke to scream aloud at the top of her voice, terrified. She kept running and finally got to a busy junction with people staring at her, wondering why she was running and screaming in such a way.
Keep them away from me.
She pleaded with the people as she pointed at the strange looking people standing in the distance, but the people looked at her weirdly, trying to understand what she was talking about. Ronke, in that moment, realized that there was something wrong with the sunglasses. She took it off immediately and threw it into the trash by the roadside. Her entire body was still filled with fear, but Ronke had to meet up with her interview, which was in the next 30 minutes. She flagged down a bike that took her straight to the interview location on time for her interview. A few minutes later, she was done with the interview and decided to return home. Her mind was still preoccupied with all that happened earlier as Ronke wondered who the strange people were and why the glasses allowed her to see them. She arrived home and tried to get something to eat when she saw the glasses sitting on her bedside table. Am I dreaming? She asked herself as she cleaned her eyes, trying to confirm if what she was seeing was real.
I threw this away in town.
She said again, trying to understand how the glasses found its way back to her room. She screamed out repeatedly for her sister, who rushed to check why she was calling on her.
Did you drop these sunglasses here?
She asked her sister, who told her that she hadn't seen the glasses before.
Did anyone come into the house?
She asked again, and her sister nodded her head, saying that no one had come into the house that day.
What have I gotten myself into?
Ronke asked herself silently as she regretted stealing from the old woman on that fateful day. All these years, Ronke had stolen several items from people but never had issues like this. She immediately remembered the popular African adage that many days for the thief and one day for the owner. Ronke usually made fun of the adage in the past, never believing that a day like this would come when she would regret stealing from a person. Her sister, seeing how terrified she looked, asked to know what the problem was, but Ronke could not bring herself to telling her all that had happened.
I am fine,
she said, blaming her weird attitude on the long interview she had that morning. You should get some rest, her sister suggested as she walked out of her room, leaving her all alone. Ronke, alone in her room, could feel goosebumps around her body. She stared at the sunglasses, wondering what she would do. When she heard a soft whisper of her name, Ronke felt shivers run down her spine. She sat there, petrified, as she asked who it was. The voice told her not to be scared. I am Adenike, the voice said, urging Ronke to wear her glasses, as only then would she be able to see her. Shaking and scared to the bones, Ronke put on her glasses and saw a young and beautiful woman who was standing in front of her. Who are you? Ronke muttered as the young woman revealed to her that she was a ghost.
Ghost?
Ronke asked as she gulped down her saliva, asking if all the strange people she had seen with the sunglasses were all ghosts. Yes, we are all ghosts, Adenike replied as she told Ronke that the sunglasses on her face was enchanted to allow its wearer to see restless spirits. She went on to say that they were all trapped in the world because of how they died, and we are hoping to find anyone who would set them free. This was why they were following her earlier, and Ronke could not believe what she had gotten herself into. She looked at Adenike, who, although being a ghost, was so calm and harmless. What happened to you? Ronke asked Adenike, who was about narrating her story, when a little girl appeared in her room and pleaded for their help.
Please help me. There's no one to help my mother,
she said repeatedly as Ronke summoned all the courage to ask her where her mother was. The little girl took them to her house, which was a short distance from Ronke's home. They walked into the house and met the little girl's mother, who who had just overdosed herself on some medication. What had happened was that the little girl's mother never knew that her husband and herself carried the AS genotype. They got married and had only one daughter who was born with sickle cell disease. For all these years, the little girl battled with sickle cell, and her parents did everything possible to help her, but all their efforts yielded no result as their daughter lived all her life in pain. One night, her father rushed out to the pharmacy to get her medications when he was hit by a reckless driver who left him for dead by the side of the road. His death hit them so hard, but her mother did everything possible to be strong for her daughter. However, luck was not on their side as her daughter died, leaving her devastated and heartbroken with no will to live. Out of desperation, she gulped down a full bottle of sleeping medication, hoping to join her daughter in the afterlife. Now, she lay there unconscious and on the verge of dying. Ronke, on seeing this, called out for help, and the woman was rushed to the nearest hospital, where she survived the suicide attempt. Her little daughter spoke to her through Ronke, pleading with her to live her life, as she was now in a place where pain no longer existed. Ronke was so glad to be of help to the little girl, whose spirit was able to rest after the encounter. She returned home, baffled at all she had experienced. Tired and exhausted, Ronke drifted into a very deep sleep. A few hours later, she had a very terrifying dream where a strange man was running after her in the forest with a knife. Ronke ran as fast as she could, trying to escape from the man who kept running after her. Luckily for her, her sister Bolu walked into her room and saw her struggling in her sleep.
Ronke, Ronke,
She said, tapping her sister and trying to wake her up from sleep, but Ronke seemed non-responsive as she continued to struggle in her sleep. Bolu felt a strong urge to pray for her sister, which she did, and immediately Ronke jerked out of her sleep petrified.
Ronke, you need to tell me what's really going on.
Her sister said to her as she looked at her shocked and unsure of what to say.
It was just a nightmare.
Ronke told her sister Bolu, who knew deep within her spirit that Ronke was hiding something away from her.
You need to tell me what is happening.
She said again to Ronke, who told her that she would love to be alone. Bolu left Ronke all alone in the room, and Ronke sat on her bed frightened, her eyes widened in terror as she wondered why the strange man was trying to kill her in the dream. Immediately, she heard the calm voice of Adenike, who said to her that she knew who the evil man was. Ronke immediately wore the glasses and saw Adenike standing in the corner of her room crying. Her terror turned into compassion as she asked what the problem could be. Adenike then began to recount the story of her life. She said that a few years ago, she met an old friend of hers who seemed to be living the life. She was just a poor girl, living alone with her poor mother, so her friend Dakore promised to help her out of poverty, seeing how poor they were at the time. So, she believed in her friend and trusted her with all of her heart. As the days passed, Dakore kept to her word and provided her with a huge sum of money to look after her mother. Adenike was so delighted and immediately rushed home to show her mother the money that her friend Dakore had given to her. But her mother did not seem delighted and asked her what her friend wanted in return for the money. She told her mother that her friend never requested for a payback, but her mother did not seem convinced and told her to return the money. Believing that her mother was being too unreasonable, she kept the money and lied that she had returned it to her friend Dakore. Months passed and Adenike began to spend time with Dakore. They went everywhere together, and Dakore even offered for Adenike to come live in her mansion with her. So Adenike lied to her mother that she got a job in town and was given a small room in her office quarters to live to make it easy for her to resume work early. Little did her mother know that she was living with Dakore, who provided her with her every need. One day, this was so many months later, they were home alone when a man who was old enough to be Dakore's father arrived their home and sat in their living room. Dakore immediately knelt before the man, showing him so much respect that would make one to believe that he was a king or one from the royal lineage. I quickly joined her to kneel down before the man, oblivious of what was happening. Little did I know that the man was the one responsible for all of her wealth. He belonged to an evil cult that used young women to renew their life. What had happened was that the man tasked Dakore with looking for a young woman who had so much life left in her that he would use to renew his life. He told her that the woman had to spend his money, which he gave to her, and also live in her house, which he also paid for a period of time to ensure that the sacrifice worked. So Dakore tricked Adenike into being the sacrifice for the evil man. Just as she knelt before the evil man, he looked into her eyes and she fell to the ground unconscious. Several hours later, she found herself in a very thick forest in the middle of the night, lying in a casket which was set to go into the ground. Adenike screamed out for help, but no one was around to help her. That was how she was buried alive, in the middle of the forest alone. Adenike could not help but cry, wishing that she listened to her mother's warning. She told Ronke that the man that attacked her the other night was the same man who buried her alive in the forest.
He came to kill you because he knows that you will help set my spirit free. Now he knows our plan. You need to help me find my mother before my body is moved from its current burial site, because the evil man knows that if my body is found, he will die in 12 hours. But if it is moved before it's found, my spirit will never find rest.
Ronke, on hearing this, asked for her mother's address and set out to go find her mother. A few minutes later, Ronke arrived at a small quiet house and knocked on the door, her heart beating at how she would explain to Adenike's mother that she spoke to her daughter's ghost. She knocked several times and a woman came out to answer the door. Lo and behold, Ronke caught sight of the same old woman who she stole her purse in the bus, the owner of the evil sunglasses. Ronke introduced herself to her, apologizing for stealing her purse and explaining all she had seen to her. Ronke then revealed to her that her daughter Adenike was standing right in front of her. You could see the sadness in her eyes as she realized that her precious daughter was dead. Ronke handed the sunglasses to the old woman, who wore it and saw her daughter standing right in front of her, not in flesh but in spirit. Tears dropped from her eyes as her daughter Adenike apologized to her for not listening to her counsel. She told her mother all that happened to her and how her friend Dakore gave her up for sacrifice. She also told them where she was buried and how to get there, and her mother immediately set out to the forest to find her body. Ronke was so happy to be of help. She returned home excited that everything was now over. Her sister came into her room to invite her for night vigil, but Ronke was too tired to attend. She stayed back at home as her sister left her all alone to go to church. After preparing dinner, Ronke sat on her bed to eat when she checked her phone and saw a message from the company that interviewed her earlier that she had been hired. Ronke was so delighted to resume work. She got her clothes ready and went to bed early so as to wake up early to prepare for work. Just as she lay there asleep, the evil man appeared to her again in her dream. This time, Ronke found herself in the middle of the forest, about to be buried alive like Adenike. She screamed repeatedly, but nothing happened, and she began to wonder if this was a dream or reality. The evil man then informed her that he needed her spirit to replace that of Adenike that she helped set free. He told Ronke that she was going to die in place of Adenike for helping her ruin his sacrifice. The fury in his eyes terrified her greatly as she laid in the casket, unable to move. Ronke struggled to set herself free, but all her efforts proved futile until she heard a very familiar voice speaking right in front of her. It was her sister Bolu, who was standing between the evil man and herself, praying and shielding her from all the evil arrows sent by the evil man. What had happened was that afternoon, Adenike's mother found her daughter's gravesite in the middle of the forest, resulting in the contamination of the life extension sacrifice of the evil man, which was to remain untouched and hidden forever. Now the gravesite had been found. The evil man had to replace Adenike with another female of the same age in 12 hours, or risk dying, as the sacrifice, which had been offered to the spirits and taken away, had to be replaced, or the spirits would have no other option but to come for him. Seeing that Ronke was the same age as Adenike, the evil man decided to sacrifice her in place of Adenike for aiding to ruin his sacrifice. What he did not know was that Ronke's sister Bolu possessed greater powers that made it impossible for him to succeed with his evil plans. Ronke watched as her sister continued to pray, shielding her from the evil powers of the occultic man. A bright light enveloped them as Ronke woke up to find herself back in her room. It was almost morning, and Ronke was so terrified at what had happened. Her sister returned home not long afterwards and walked straight to Ronke's room, asking for an explanation of all that she saw in her vision. Ronke, in that moment, realized that what had happened was not a dream, but a spiritual battle that was fought and won, all thanks to her sister's prayers. She broke down in tears and told her sister the entire story, starting with her constant urge to steal and how this her stealing led her into so much trouble. Ronke recounted everything to her sister, from the moment she stole the old woman's purse to the spirits she saw through the sunglasses who she had to help, and how her help led her into the current situation that she found herself. Bolu listened to her sister intently, shocked to hear all that she had gone through. She held Ronke's hands and prayed for her, reminding her that she was never alone in the fight. Ronke nodded, her heart still racing from the ordeal, but comforted by her sister's presence and support. They spent some minutes praying, and Ronke got ready for her first day at work. She was so delighted to start her new job and hurriedly left her house, ensuring not to be late on her first day. Once Ronke arrived at the company, she met her supervisor, who told her that she was resuming a higher and better position than the one that she was interviewed for. Her new position not only had a better salary, but came with perks like furnished accommodation and an official car. Ronke was over the moon, as she never saw it coming. She was escorted to her new office and could not help but share the good news with her sister, who shared in her joy and advised her to say a quick prayer in her office to seal her new appointment, and Ronke did as her sister had advised. She sat on her office chair, filled with so much joy in her heart, when suddenly the supervisor walked in and told her that she had to leave their company. "What did I do?" Ronke asked the supervisor, shocked at how everything was now turning out. She was escorted out of the company, confused at what she did wrong, to be relieved of her job at such a short time. The happiest day of her life turned out to be her worst, as Ronke watched as her golden opportunity was snatched away from her hands. Tears poured down her eyes as she headed home to meet her sister Bolu, who was so shocked to see her at home.
Why are you back so early?
She asked Ronke, who told her all that happened.
In all things, Give thanks to God.
Bolu told Ronke, who did not seem to be in the mood, to listen to her sister's motivational preaching. I wish to be left alone, Ronke said to her sister as she retired back to her room, wailing and beating herself up for what she could not understand. I must go back there tomorrow, she said to herself, hoping to find anyone who would be kind enough to explain to her why she was relieved of her job even before she started. The next morning, Ronke woke up with the determination burning in her heart. She was resolute in her decision to return to the company and seek answers for her abrupt dismissal. Bolu, sensing her sister's resolve, prayed for her before she left the house, asking God to reveal the truth and give her sister Ronke peace. Ronke arrived the company, her heart pounding as she approached the front desk. The receptionist, recognizing her from the previous day, gave her a sympathetic look but shook her head. I'm sorry, Miss Ronke, but the decision is final. There's nothing more I can do. Please, Ronke pleaded. I just need to understand why this happened. I did not even get a chance to start. The receptionist hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was watching before leaning in closer and talking to her. I shouldn't be telling you this, but there's something strange going on here. The position you were offered had been given out to several people who ended up dying after working for only 2 years. The last one died a few hours ago. That was why you were being offered the position. Ronke opened her eyes in shock as she could not believe what she was hearing. She decided to return home when suddenly she noticed a bit of a commotion at the entrance of the company. Ronke stood by the side as she heard that the owner of the company was walking in. She stood in the corner and caught sight of the evil man who almost used her for rituals the other night. He was the owner of the company who hired and fired her on the same day. This revelation sent shivers down her spine as Ronke ran out of the company terrified. On her way out, she overheard the company's security talking about the strange deaths in the company. Madame Dakore was a very nice woman, oh, he said as he shook his head, questioning why she had to die mysteriously without an explanation. Ronke, in that moment, froze in shock to realize that the woman who died was Dakore, the same woman that offered Adenike to the evil man for his ritual. Now she was dead, used to replace Adenike, the same friend she sacrificed to the evil man. So this man finally used Dakore to renew his life. When he did not succeed in using me, she thought to herself as she quickly rushed home to tell her sister all that had happened. That was how the silent prayer she said saved her from the hands of death. Ronke, in that moment, decided to repent of her sins and took God seriously for saving her life. She later got a better job and her life changed for the better as her petty stealing stopped and she lived a purpose-filled life. The lesson to be learned from this story is that we should not take that which belongs to another to avoid attracting curses upon our lives. Listen to the counsel of your elders, because what an elder sees sitting down, you might not see even when you climb the top of an iroko tree. Never feel disappointed when things do not go as planned, because God might have a better plan for you in the end. Always remember to carry out the necessary tests before making marital decisions to avoid lifelong pain and suffering. Last but not least, do not meddle in evil practices because evil has a way of always backfiring. I hope you enjoyed the story.